it's so overwhelming, what should you do? This is what you should do. Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I am talking to you about something which is very important, probably around this time of year for many of you, which is interview tips, how to do well in an interview. Now for me, I've had a few interviews in my life, the biggest interview being probably my PhD interview and how I got onto my PhD program. I've also had interviews in virtual settings as well, so I can comment a little bit on that. But I really want to tell you the main points, the 5 main things that you can do to improve your performance in an interview. Now, I just want to say that this video is for anyone who is going to do an interview. It's not just for people who want to do PhD interviews, although that is the thing that I can comment on probably the most. But if you have an interview for any type of job, these tips will help you. All of these require preparation. You have to prepare for your interview. When you get that interview date, work for it for like a good week before. I block time out in my diary for when I'm gonna work on my interview prep. Carve out time before your interview for set hours where you're going to prepare for that interview. And now, what should you prepare? It's so overwhelming, what should you do? This is what you should do. The first thing I recommend is going through the spec that you're given and really understand the requirements of the role you are applying for. What I do personally is I go through the spec, I open a Word document, copy it in, and for every single thing on that spec, I come up with a specific example of where I have shown that role. And if I don't have experience in the thing that they are looking for in 1 or 2 of the things, I like to put them to the end and say, I'm really looking forward to learning about this, or I'm really looking forward to enhancing my skills in this. So if you don't have experience in some things, don't pretend that you do, because it normally does come across that you're not being genuine. I'm a terrible liar, so I can't pretend that I know something when I don't. So if that is the case for a few items on the list of requirements or the specification, then put those to one side and just say in the interview, I'm really looking forward to learning more about these skills. So for everything else, I come up with a really specific example of a time in the past where I have shown that I have that necessary skill. And I also think of those really general questions that come up in every interview, which seem relatively straightforward, but on the spot, they're really difficult to answer. And that's things like, show me an example of when you've worked in a team. When have you shown leadership skills? When have you resolved a conflict in work? Those types of really general questions that tend to come up over and over again in interviews, come up with a specific example, because then you can use it across multiple interviews as well. But just be prepared to answer those questions with specifics. They don't want to hear waffling about, tell me about a time you worked in a team. Oh, well, I work in a team all the time in my undergrad. I'm a good team player. That's not the answer they want to hear. They want to be like, okay, during my second year undergrad, we were doing a group project on this and I took the lead in this and this role. During that time, this is what I did and this is what I learned. Have a little bit about the specific experience and what you've learned from that, because what you're showing the panel there is what you can bring to the role that they are offering already, and also how you will potentially act in these situations in the new workplace that you're applying for. The second thing I would say is know your why. Why do you want this job? What is it about this specific role that really appeals to you? For me, for my PhD, I had 2 whys. I had a personal why, which was my grandma suffered from Alzheimer's disease and other individuals in my family have as well. So I had a personal reason why I wanted to study Alzheimer's disease. And then I also had a more professional why, which is I'm really interested in specific mechanisms that happen during neurodegeneration, and this is how these misfolded proteins in the brain spread through the brain. I'm really interested in that mechanism, and the place where I was applying for my PhD was specialists, or are specialists because I go there now. They are specialists in that mechanism. So I had 2 really strong reasons why I wanted to pursue my PhD. So really have a think about why you want that role and come up with a few specific bullet points, because you might not necessarily be asked why this role, although some jobs do ask why. but having that why and getting that into your narrative when answering questions also is a really good way to show your passion and why they should give you the position. The third thing that I would spend some time on when you're applying for a job is looking through that workplace's most recent outputs or most recent research. So for PhD type roles, master's roles, you would go and look at the most recent research done by that department. For other more general jobs, go onto their website and look at the most recent projects that they have been doing. I would then say to go and digest some of that content, understand the position that the workplace or the department is at right now. What about that you are interested in? So pick a few points from their most recent work that really interests you and explain why they interest you. And then also you could add on a little bit about how you would like to contribute to that work. If there is a specific skill, so for example, in my master's, I did a lot of stem cell work, induced pluripotent stem cells, human stem cell work, and no one in the department that I was working in was doing anything with those cells. So I said in my interview, I would love to contribute to the work going on at the minute, and I was specific about the research. I said it would be really interesting to test this in human stem cells, and I have a year's worth of experience for this, and you can really talk about how your skills would enhance the research of that department. And for other jobs or other roles, you can bring in your skills as well. So for example, if you're applying for like a science communication role and you do science social media, you could say, I recently did a series of posts on this topic and it went down really well. I used some of my homemade graphics. I would really love to be able to apply some of my graphics to some of the information that you've recently put on these projects, and we could get a further reach. So bringing your skills into what that department or that workplace is currently putting out is a really good way to show that you're interested and you can add to what they're doing. You will be an asset. The next thing to do, the fourth thing, is to look at the big questions in that field of research if you're applying for a PhD or a master's, or the big opportunities or the big questions in that workplace where you're applying for a job. So with a PhD, this is a relatively more straightforward thing for me to talk about because I've done it before. If you go and look at the big questions in the field that your department that you're applying for is specializing in, this will show that you are interested in the field and you have an up-to-date knowledge about what's going on in general and what those big questions are. For me, I went and read a couple of reviews on a few different areas that my department was specializing in, just so I had a general overview of the state of the field. And I didn't memorize everything from these reviews. What I did was I thought of, okay, these are the big questions that people are trying to answer. These are a few of the current ideas about what could be happening, and this is what I think could be happening. So from the evidence, I sort of formed my own opinion using what was already published out there. And I also spoke about what I think could be interesting to look at. I think with a PhD interview, don't stress yourself out with, I need to have a really novel idea. That's not the case. It's more so just showing that you're interested in the field and you're aware of what is going on in that field. So read some reviews and think about the big questions, what the current evidence is, and some of your own thoughts on what some of the problems could be or some of the pitfalls of the work could be, and then also some of the future directions of the work in the field. And this is really, really general. I don't mean you need to plan an experiment, just more so like at the minute, field is really focusing on using mouse models. And we know that even though mouse models are good models for replicating certain diseases, they aren't perfect. So we really need to move to more human-based models. And I saw recently there's a new technique where you can use human brain slices in culture to look at neuron activity, something like that, where it shows that you can see a sort of area of the field that might need some work, and you can see some ways that it could be addressed. But on a very, very general level, don't be stressing yourself out by planning experiments. I really don't think for a general PhD program, that's not what they're looking for. And for non-PhD roles, so I'm going to jump here to my favorite, science communication. You can look more so in general at science communication and how it's being done across multiple platforms, and then you could maybe talk about the way in which people are more receptive to information now than they were, and problems with that and advantages to that. And you can talk in general about the profession rather than just the individual role that you're applying for, just to show that you've had some wider thinking on the role and the relevance of the role. The fifth thing and the last thing that I would suggest you do for an interview is think of really good questions to ask the panel. Almost every interview ends with, do you have any questions for us? And I just think having some questions that you've really thought about shows that you care about the role. What I did personally was I looked up the members of my panel. There were 3 of them. I looked into a bit about what they did and thought about 3 questions that each one of them would be interested in or could answer with interest. Now, I'm not necessarily targeting the questions at each person. I'm not being like, this is what I want to know. It's just more so that when you ask a question that one of them is interested in, you're going to pique their interest and they're going to show that you are keen and you are really up for the role. I'd also think about some general questions as well to ask the panel about what the benefits will be for you to join their department. I think I asked a question about collaborations because to me, collaboration is really important. You've got to remember that this interview is not just the panel interviewing you, it's also you seeing if you fit in with that workplace. And it is a bit like you're interviewing them, like you're deciding whether to spend 3+ years at this institution. So use the question section to ask interesting questions and also questions that will tell you if this is the right place for you to work. Most interviews now are virtual, which has benefits and disadvantages. I think the benefits are you're in your own space, so you can make the space very calming and relaxing, and you don't have the stress on the day of the interview of trying to find where you need to go. But the disadvantages are that you can, well, for me personally, I feel a bit more distractible in my room because I am used to the space. I'm used to the space where I'm chilling out. So it can be a little bit harder to maintain focus. So what I would say is get dressed as you would for an actual interview, even though you're doing it in your room. Just give yourself that sense of, I now have to focus, I now have to be in the zone, and clear your space. You don't want anything distracting the interviewers in the background. And I don't know, for me personally, I've had a few virtual interviews for things. I try and keep my face engaged, which I don't know if I naturally would do that anyway in an in-person interview, but because you can actually see your face, it's a bit more like, do I look bored? So I was like, yeah. So smiling and trying to be engaged even when I'm not speaking. I don't know if that helps in any way, but I would just say try and treat your interview like it would be an in-person interview as well. Make sure no one disturbs you. Put a sign on your door if you have to, do not enter, like interview in progress. Yeah, and just make your space really nice and calm, and I'm sure you will do great. So that is it. Those are my 5 tips for interviews. Overall, I just think relax, be yourself, speak like yourself. Don't try and be someone that you're not, because that's just something else to stress about when you're in an interview. So relax, prepare, and just show your enthusiasm. And that's what I would say works. It worked for me, and hopefully it'll work for you. So good luck with your interviews. If you want more productivity tips, neuroscience tips, brain tips, then come and follow me, subscribe to the channel, and you can catch me on social media as well. And I will see you next time. Bye.